Hello, everybody. My name is David Smith, and welcome to Couple Minutes with a Nobody. On the other side of the room here, we have Ben Giroux, who's been so kind to set this up for us. And thank you, Ben, for making this available to me this morning. I appreciate it. This, well, I guess we'll call it a podcast, came out of an idea that Ben had as he looked through my catalog of music that's on YouTube and thought that perhaps a companion podcast, if you will, might add interest as the people that play the music on my original music are probably far more interesting than the music itself. So we're going to start today with a gentleman named Kurt McGettrick. Kurt McGettrick is a player, came out of the Maryland, Virginia, D.C. area. He's a graduate of Rich Montgomery High School. He went on to go to Shenandoah Conservatory. And I knew about Kurt for many, many years because he was a legendary player in this D.C. area, Maryland area. I finally met up with him at a big band that used to take place at Towson State. Also, every now and then, was a Catholic with Hank Levy, and Hank was writing all these odd meter pieces, that a lot of which was performed by Don Ellis. Got to know Kurt pretty well. We never really played a lot together, but around the same time, unbeknownst to both of us, we left for the West Coast. I went to LA. Kurt ended up going to San Francisco, where he played in a band called the Hoodoo Rhythm Devils. And through that, he somehow got hooked up with David Rubenstein, who at the time was one of the big executives out on the West Coast for, I think, CBS Records at the time. And Kurt was a great arranger, and so David started to hire him to arrange things. He arranged for the Pointer Sisters. He arranged them for the Meters, a lot of different groups. And so that began his career as an arranger and player. Kurt called me one day and asked me how the situation in Los Angeles was, and wanted to know if he thought he could survive and make a living down in LA. And I told him I felt if I could make a living, that he would have no problem at all. Kurt ended up moving to Los Angeles, and once he got here, he started to figure out the ropes and started doing a lot of sessions. And we have a saying in Los Angeles that if you ever wanted to get a lot of work in Los Angeles, all you had to do was go on the road. Well, Kurt didn't go on the road. Kurt went back to D.C. to visit his mother, who at that time was not in the best of health. And of course, while Kurt was in Maryland, Frank Zappa's people were trying to get in touch with Kurt to come and do an audition. Kurt subsequently went back to Los Angeles and auditioned for and got the Zappa job, and he was on the last Zappa band while Zappa was still alive. Kurt and I remain really good friends, and I was gigging throughout the Los Angeles area, and I had a night at a place called $2 Bills, which was a place that was run by a bunch of folks who loved L. Ron Hubbard. And you could play anything you wanted to there. It was a $25 a night gig per man. And I used to take my band down there. We played my original music down there. Anyhow, Kurt called me up, and he was involved in Zappa rehearsals at that point, which were, I think, Zappa was a real taskmaster. So I think these rehearsals were long, tedious, and complicated because Frank's music is, and you know anything about his music, it's incredibly, incredibly difficult. Excuse me. Frank at the time was using a thing called a synclavier, which was one of the original synthesizers that would not only you could compose on it, but it also would print it out for you. Problem was, when he tried to print out Frank's music, Frank was so complicated in his polyrhythms that not even synclavier could figure out how to beam these rhythms. So Kurt told me they would have beaming sessions where the synclavier would spit out music, and then they would have to sit down and hand beam the music so they were able to play it. Kurt called me, I guess after he had been doing this for a couple of weeks, and he called me up, and only in Kurt kind of speech, he said, "Dave, I need an ear douche." I said, "You need what?" "I need an ear douche. I've been playing Frank's music, now for weeks and weeks and weeks, and I got to do something to get it out of my head." He said, "Are you still working the job at the gig down at $2 bills?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Could I come down and play with you?" I said, "Of course you can. Come on down." So a few weeks later, I'm working the gig down there. Kurt walks in with his baritone saxophone. Kurt, by the way, that was his instrument of preference. A lot of people wanted to play tenor, and he would not do it unless you paid him a lot of money, because he really had a great dislike for the tenor saxophone, and all he wanted to do was play baritone saxophone. And a lot of people had a hard time understanding that. And I recall one time an interaction he had with a trombone player who was leading this like R&B band. They were going to go to Japan. I was in that band at the time, and I got Kurt to come out and play. And the trombone player was trying to get him to realize that he was going to need to play tenor. It was an R&B band. I need to play tenor on this band. And after the rehearsal, I'm starting to hear just bits and pieces of this conversation. It's getting a little heated because Kurt is saying, "I'm not going to play the baritone saxophone. You want me to go to this thing? I'm going to play the baritone saxophone. I'm not going to play the tenor saxophone." So then the last part of it, I heard trombone player says, "You really expect to make a living playing the baritone saxophone?" To which Kurt replied, "Wait a minute. You're a trombone player, and you're trying to make a living." And that was the end of that conversation. Needless to say, Kurt did not go on that tour. Anyhow, so he comes in, he's got his baritone saxophone, and I talked to him. I said, "We're on a break," and we were having a beer talking. And I said, "What do you want to do? You want to play some tunes? You want to play some standards?" He says, "No, I want to play a 12-bar blues. That's it." And he says, "I'm probably going to take a pretty long solo." And if you had ever heard Kurt take a solo, most of his solos were pretty long, and they would get into a complete frenzy, and you would think at some point this was probably going to be the last solo he'd ever play on the face of the earth, because that's the amount of energy that he put into it. So we start playing this 12-bar blues. Kurt's up there. I've got a piano solo, you got a guitar solo, and he takes his solo. And there's a little bit of interaction between he and the audience and the people that were dancing. How they were dancing to a 12-bar blues, I guess it was a slow dance or something. I don't know. So, and now the interaction's becoming stronger and stronger, and Kurt gets down off of our stage, walks across the club to where the bar is. The bar was on the other side. He, with the help of some people, he gets up on the bar, and he's now interacting with the crowd to where the crowd's starting to throw money at him.
He's playing the whole time.
He's playing the whole time. The place is in a frenzy. It's an absolute frenzy. And then at the high point of his solo, Kurt literally jumps off the bar into the crowd with his baritone saxophone around his neck while he's playing. And he survived. The audience survived. And luckily the baritone saxophone survived. This is a typical sort of Kurt McGettrick moment. And I'll never forget that experience. And if you talk to other people, they have similar stories about Kurt. A couple last things here about him. This particular tune is called "No Better," and we did it in the late 70s at a Devonshire studio, which is a really very fine studio in L.A. I was honored that he asked me to play on this track. It had some of the best studio musicians in the business on it, and I was really quite honored to do it. Much of the drum part is written out, so it's a good thing I knew how to read music, because some of the basic patterns are not basic. They're written out. Fill-ins are fill-ins. He didn't write those out. We're not too sure who's on this recording. We sort of have an idea who it is.
Yeah, what year is this?
Probably, I would say late '70s, early '80s. I'm not exactly sure. Um, if you listen to this music, though, it's so inventive. It starts out with just a basic progression, kind of a fusiony type thing. Gerard Moulet, who was a great friend of Kurt's, is playing guitar on this. That I do know. But then all of a sudden, it sounds like there's a mellotron that comes in, but it's not a mellotron. It's a chorus of different size recorders that play this chord progression over top of it. It's just beautiful. It's enchanting. It's a good look into the mind of Kurt McGettrick and his harmonic concepts. It's really quite amazing. Um, so to track this piece down, I had to contact his daughter, who I believe is the last remaining relative of Kurt's. Kurt's wife passed a while ago. And Greer was great, and I want to thank Greer for helping me to get this track because I wanted to go back and remix it. At the time, I thought Greer only had the 2-inch tape. She sent me the 2-inch tape. I have a place that could actually use the 2-inch tape, but unbeknownst to her, a good friend of hers transferred it to Pro Tools, which was great, and I took it to a local studio in Virginia, Bob Dawson's Bias Studios. Big shout out to Bias in Virginia, and Bob, thank you. And we just went back in on Pro Tools and we remixed it, and I'm so glad we did it because I think it's really representative of Kurt and his writing.